Yo, Tim, how's it going? Let's give an introduction first. So, who are you? What do you do? Why are you here today?
My name is Tim Boucher. I live outside of Quebec City. I am an artist. I've been doing art way before AI art started, so that's not my only art thing. I've been using AI to do images that are hyper realistic, that are kind of a combination of fact and fiction. And I did my own set that was um, published as a book called Mysterious Antarctica that purported to show Admiral Boyd, no, excuse me, Admiral Byrd, uh, exploring Antarctica in the 1940s, 1950s as part of an operation. So I made a bunch of fake images that went viral, and I never pretended that they were real images. I always want people to know that these are AI images and try to talk about it. And
Yeah, I think you do make a very good job of making clear that your art is, AI generated in all of your books and all of your, website and branding. There's never a pretense that you're, that there are actual pictures that were leaked, secret government documents that were covered up or anything like that. But be that as it may, the medium of AI has allowed for a lot of people who are wanting to believe these things to begin to fall for them. So when I sent you the list of images that we're looking at today, what was sort of your professional opinion on them, even though they aren't ones that you made? What were sort of your thoughts?
right, I mean, well, they're very similar to the ones that I made, and the ones that I made were, I used prompts like historical photos or grainy black and white images, and I think with like the AI compression stuff that you see, like the weird artifacts, kind of like the fuzzy edges and stuff, when you have an old fashioned looking picture, it makes your brain sort of accept that there are flaws in this image that otherwise, if it was modern, you might not accept them.
Interesting.
When I first saw those images, I was like, well, this is a language that I speak. Like I've been making images in this style, even of this subject, for a while. So when I see them, I immediately recognize sort of stylistic elements, the way that some of the color is done, the way that sort of like light and shadow works. And also when you look at the images carefully and you think about the mass of the objects, a lot of times that's when things start to fall apart if you really examine it visually carefully. So yeah, when you send me those images, it's like, I know this, I've been doing this for a while. I think they were Stable Diffusion. Probably they might have been Mid-Journey, but I've seen things now that lead me to believe it's Stable Diffusion. So
You are able to very clearly pick up on when an image is AI generated, but it seems like the line between those things is getting, blurred, faster and faster. I think we've all kind of seen those videos recently of, AI generated video where it almost looks to the untrained eye as if it were, completely real. Do you see that line between, believable and, sort of unbelievable AI art beginning to, be blurred a little bit more recently? Do you think that's something that we're going to have to contend with soon, that we may soon be at a point where we can't tell the difference between AI and actual images?
I mean, I think we're pretty much at that point. We're maybe even past that point. Part of the thing of looking at those images is that they use an older model, an older version of Stable Diffusion, I think. That this came out in November of 22. So that was either version 1.4 or 1.5 or something of Stable Diffusion. So it's like, if we know when things came out historically, when they were posted, and you know what models were available at that time, you can start to kind of like narrow your options of what it could be. But yeah, I think we're way past that point of believability. And I think also when you have an image, a single image, people scrutinize it more than if you have 60 images and they're in a video and there's music and there's like kind of a narrative that you're spinning on top of it. So a lot of it depends on the level of scrutiny of the audience or the reader or the viewer. And a lot of it depends on the context.
What sort of responsibility do you feel, or involvement do you feel in making images that do depict things that aren't real? Even if you and I can sit here and be like, this isn't something that obviously exists, what sort of responsibility do you feel like you have in making images that some people could fall for in the wrong contexts?
As I've said, I label my images and I label my books, and I brand it and I present it in a way that says like this, I used AI to help me with this. But what I've seen is that people will take the things that I've made, and they'll remove all of those warnings or the context and the information that I put around it, and they'll present it as though it's real anyway. And they'll strip out, the watermark from Dolly image generator in the corner. So it's a tricky question, because you can be very responsible in your release of something, and then people will turn around and they'll take it and they'll decontextualize it and change the whole meaning of it. So in a way that's bad, and it could lead to bad things. But in another way, when you're an artist and you're trying to communicate something, you have to, at a certain point, also be able to just like release it and say, this will start a conversation, and we'll have a meaningful discourse, hopefully, about these elements, about the fact or the fiction or the method or all of these things about it. So to me, I think the best thing we can do is start and have these conversations, and give people a chance to understand better how the technologies work and what their impact can be. So.
Yeah, totally. No, and I think it's, in your book, Mysterious Antarctica, it has the little, like you said, the little Dolly watermark at the bottom. It's what, those are like 5 squares or something like that. And, so there are ways for, an artist who's using the medium, responsibly like yourself to be able to put these things out there. But the other difficulty that I think we're facing is that now it's a medium that's available to pretty much everyone. I mean, anyone with, an internet connection, and maybe they need to buy a subscription to, whatever the latest, greatest thing is. But, they can make images and trim out their own watermarks. And, that's something that I think we see perpetuating a lot more. I think that the best example, and a very pertinent one, is, the image set that we're looking at today, because this was one where when I started to research it, I was, looking at, the ruins in Antarctica photos, and I ended up finding the, Reuters article that you had worked on before, where it was going over your image set, but it wasn't the same images that were in, the video that we're talking about today. And so the difficulty that I find there is that because AI images are something which can be faked, or created a dime a dozen, it's really hard for us to trace them back to their original source. Now, you were able to do some digging on these images, and we're able to sort of trace them back to where we think they came from. But, it's really challenging now to find exactly what the origin point of a lot of these images are.
And there are efforts underway, like, to build technologies that are like metadata schemes that can classify and like tag things based on where they were generated. But what I've seen with those when I tested them is like, I get an image that has one of these metadata tags on it, open it in Photoshop, save it again, and now all of that metadata is gone. So if that's what we're relying on to help us like determine what's true and where things came from, that's not a complete solution yet. Like we need to keep working on that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I feel like we've all done that where, you drag an image off of, Google Images, and it opens as like a web file or something, and you can only open it in your browser, so you just take a screenshot of it and boom, you have a JPEG. Like, all the metadata is gone.
And that's the way that these things spread is people take them out of their original context and they just re-upload it and they put their own spin on it, and then it goes around the world again and again and again. So yeah.
So you did a little bit of sleuthing in sort of, helping uncover where these images came from. Could you give us just a little bit of a rundown on sort of what your detective work turned up and how that process was?
Yeah, I should also add something that I didn't add in our introduction too, is that for quite a number of years, I worked as a content moderator for a somewhat large web platform. And I did a lot of kind of like having to dig about like, is an account real? Is this fraud? Is this like linked to some known, terrorist thing, or is there some other weird deeper level? So I had to do a lot of those kinds of investigations using what they call like open source intelligence, which is like things you can find accessible on the web, like Facebook or image searches or Google or whatever, to try to figure out, what is the ground truth of this situation as best that I can. So it's not my first rodeo on this, I should say. But so what I did was I started with the images that you sent me from, I think, a TikTok video. And I put a few of those into a reverse image search in Google. And that gave me a clean version by seeing like, it will show you what images are similar to the image that you uploaded. So that gave me a clean version to work with. And from there, I started tracking and building a timeline of like, okay, when was this first posted? Where was it posted? What language? And I kind of came up with a chart, and I had to iteratively work back. It actually took me a few nights of digging on this. But I found the original source, and the original source, it seems, is an artist on YouTube named Edgar Reyes. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, but and he admits to it in a video on his channel and a video on another channel that it's kind of a long interview about how he did it and why he did it. And he considers himself an artist too, and he makes a lot of the same points that I've been talking about already, about sort of like using the tools for creative exploration and all this stuff. And then there's the questions that, of course, about how does it spread and what happens after the artists release it. And that's the part where his story especially gets kind of weird, because I don't know if he knows this either, because it's all digging that I did that's as of a day or two ago. But what I saw was that after his images were posted to his YouTube channel, where he has a bunch of videos about AI art and all that kind of stuff. Later on, they get reposted in the next week or two onto archive.org to make it look like it's a historical document. And then suddenly there starts to be a bunch of Russian websites that picked up those images. There's one that is like a sort of a Russian version of 4chan that seems to be one of the big like places where it started to propagate. And then from there, it goes to a number of other Russian websites that, in my digging, I found were publicly linked to disinformation networks and propaganda networks that are known to be Russian origin. And that's not like my opinion. That's the opinion of multiple independent outlets that I looked at that covered that site where it got reposted to. And those images got, at that point, recontextualized by whoever wrote that article in Russian, with a bunch of new talking points and new ideas that are not at all contained in the original video. The original video is just images and music. So that got put up into this Russian website. And then from there, it appears that it got translated into at least 3 other languages: Czech, Slovak, Lithuanian. I saw, there was also a drop-down menu, and I don't know how many languages are listed there, if it's automatic translation or what, but that struck me as weird, that, this pathway of propagation, that it would go onto archive.org, it would go onto this Russian version of 4chan, then it would go onto apparently a propaganda network in multiple languages in multiple countries in Eastern Europe. So oftentimes in this kind of investigation, you never really know what the ground truth is. You kind of come up with like probabilities, and based on what rules you're operating under, or what you're trying to achieve. But I think in this case, it seems pretty conclusive that they were made by an artist using AI. And then after that, they get picked up and repurposed by other actors, especially also on sites like Rumble and Odyssey. And you see there's a lot of copies of it on YouTube too now, from different accounts. But it's like, after it leaves the original creator's account, it just gets like reposted and reposted and reposted endlessly. So it's, at a certain point, it becomes difficult to track the origin of who was the first, so.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all the digging you did on that. And, it is upsetting to see. I know I looked at some of the links you sent, and not only are they sort of, disinformation websites, but they're websites with hate speech on them. I mean, like just a couple of those posts are just vicious anti-Semitism. And, I think that, I guess the next question is, as an artist who works with the AI medium, especially kind of talking to, or, seeing another set of images from another AI artist, both of you do your due diligence to make sure that people know it's AI, that you're doing it for artistic purposes, that it's a creative outlet, and yet still these images are sort of co-opted and used in dangerous ways. How do you feel personally seeing this medium that you have a very strong attachment to, and that you use a lot, being used and sort of bastardized for bad purposes?
Yeah, I mean, it sucks, and if it was my images being used that way, I would be mad, and I would try to take action. What I would probably do is I would file DMCA copyright claims against people using the images, first of all, without my permission, but more importantly, in a way that's derogatory or extremely offensive, you know? So I think there could be tools that artists might be able to employ if they find people using their stuff in the wrong way. But in this case, there are so many accounts that are doing it across so many websites, it would be extremely time consuming and difficult for anyone to track all of those uses. So it's a good question of like, how do you build artifacts as an artist, or how do you portray narratives that are resilient to being misused by other people appropriating them and changing their meaning. I don't think there's an easy answer about that. I think you have to kind of do it on a case by case basis. But I have done it in the past where I found people using my images and it seemed all wrong to me, and either I contacted them and they changed it, or I contacted YouTube or whatever, and YouTube took them down on copyright grounds. So.
Well, it's good that there is the tools out there, at least to, you know, keep those things from spreading too far, especially if you're able to. I take it someone generating an image, they hold the copyright claim to.
Well, this is a tricky one too, because in the US, the Copyright Office, the current opinion is that they do not hold the copyright to it. But I'm not in the US, I'm in Canada. And I've registered the copyright for all of my books that contain my images and everything like that. So technically in Canada, the law is different about how these things work, but also in the US and Canada and Europe, everywhere, this is all in flux right now because of how these technologies are changing what it means to create and what it means to be the author of something, you know? So personally, my opinion is, if you're using it, this tool, and you're putting your creative effort into it, then these are your creations. You know, like, why should I be allowed to use one tool and express my creativity like Photoshop or drawing, but the second I change the tool that I use, I'm no longer expressing my creativity, you know, like, and that's no longer a protected thing. So I think there needs to be more deep thinking about this from the perspective of the artists, especially of like, how do you protect the work that you create using these tools, either in terms of just misuse or in terms of unauthorized use. These are open questions, and they vary widely in terms of where you are and what the law is, and it's all super tricky and weird and cloudy, but that's like what makes it interesting and exciting too as an art form, is because it forces us to ask all these questions and have all these conversations and have to like tease out these legal ideas and stuff about ownership or you know, all those things. So I think that's part of the fun, even though it makes it complicated.
Yeah, well, I think that segues us kind of along perfectly to sort of my next question. You know, AI is a very recent sort of development, especially making it this available to the public and having so many people be able to have their hands on it. And I'm curious sort of your opinions as an artist on AI, especially an artist who works with an AI format, because there's been a lot of controversy recently about, you know, whether it is art, whether it isn't art, whether, you know, it counts as its own like sort of, you know, thing, whether it should be, you know, as valid as other forms of art. As someone who works within that medium, but someone who is trained in other formats before adopting AI, how do you really feel like, you know, what would you have to say for that conversation?
I mean, first of all, like, I'm not in the business of like collecting permission slips from other people to tell me whether or not you know, like whether or not what I'm doing is art or is not art, or if it's good or if it's bad.
Spoken like a true artist.
You know, it's like, yeah, you know, I wanna understand people's point of view and get their feedback when I release things and see if they like it or they don't like it or what they think of different aspects of it. But like, there's so much of this online where people are just like, you're not a real artist, you're not a real author, you're not this, you're not that, because you didn't do it the way that you're supposed to do it. You didn't follow my expectations of the form and this. And it's like, look, we've been having these kind of arguments in the world of art for, you know, at least the past 100 years, if not a lot longer. I think as the world changed into its modern incarnation. But, you know, if you look at these arguments, they go back to, you know, Dada and Surrealists and all of that stuff, who we're doing crazy things like Marcel Duchamp, like putting a urinal into a gallery. You know, it's like people were mad about that too, and like that's not art. You know, like that's just something that you piss in. You know, and it's like, so it's like we this isn't a new situation, and I think artists are the people who are best equipped to explore these tools and to find their contours and their limits and their good and bad attributes, and to get us talking about them, because artists tend to think about things differently. They tend to approach problems from a creative structure that other people might not do. Like an engineer who's building an AI system is not going to think through all of the things that an artist is going to think through when they sit down and use it. So it's like we need both of those things, and that's something I've been part of some group advocacy, trying to get artists have a chance to have their voice be heard in terms of like policy and like how these technologies should be regulated or not regulated, and just being able to express our opinion, because there's so much negative sentiment. And look, I get it, I get all the negative sentiment, but as an artist, again, it's like if you listen to all the people telling you no, you're never going to do anything. You're never going to.
There'd be no art.
Yeah, you're never going to accomplish anything. You're going to sit like in your house, like curled up in a ball, in your world of safety where everything is no. It's like, so at a certain point you have to step beyond that and try things out. And also in terms of the legal arguments, I do think that like the training is fair use under U.S. law. I think we're going to see that come out in the courts. It's still up in the air, but it's heading in that direction, that it's going to be ruled as fair use for the training of copyrighted materials. I think at the same time, like artists should be thinking about, okay, like look, AI is going to eat the world. Like AI is going to suck up every piece of information and use it for training everywhere for everything. So if you're an artist, what you could be doing is thinking about ways of like, well, how can I, using my creative abilities, build an extremely high value data set? And I know we're used to thinking about like, okay, an artist makes a music album, or you make a painting or a series of paintings, and it's like it could be any of those things. It could be all of those things. It could be many different things combined, and I think it could vary from artist to artist. But we've started to see that with people like Grimes and people like Holly Herndon. I think she released like her voice samples for people to use for AI applications and stuff. So
interesting. So this is making various, sort of artistic endeavors for the purpose of training AI off of.
Right. Or I mean, it doesn't have to be for that, but I'm just thinking of like, we live in a world now of data sets, and it's like when you subscribe to a subscription service like Spotify or whatever, you're getting access to all of these data sets of the artists, their albums, their singles, their B-sides, whatever. So that's the world we live in now, and it's like either you can rail against it as an artist, and if that's what you feel you should do, like do that, or if you want to not use any of this stuff, like totally do that too. But if you want to use these things and you want to try, like think about what you can do that really adds value here. And I think there's a lot that artists can do that adds value. Also, like I've recently been going back to painting, like with a brush on canvas, and it's really fun. It gets me back into that headspace of being like a teenager, like staying up late at night, like listening to headphones, like, and it's, I don't want to say that it's an experience that you can't have when you use AI tools, but the experience is really different. And this is something that I think it's really interesting too about being an artist using the AI tools, is that, people talk about flow states and kind of like getting in the zone, getting in the groove when you're making something. And I definitely have that happen with AI exploration stuff, that like sometimes you're like, okay, I'm typing away, doing some prompts, getting some results, but they're kind of so what. But then there's these other moments where you get like really enraptured and you start going like fast, and like your brain, it's almost like your brain and the technology are like syncing up in terms of like how you're phrasing things and how it's interpreting things. And then suddenly you're just able to like get in the zone and get like, hundreds of amazing images in a few minutes. And it's something people try to claim. I've seen a lot on comments on articles about my work, like, oh, this isn't real art, there's no creative effort in it. But it's like, it's not true. You still have, as an artist, you have all of the feelings and the deep expression when you use these tools, just as you would when you're holding a paintbrush. It's just a different context. And I think, like, what I think of as like the locus of the creative act, like where is the creation happening, it just changes a little bit. It's like it takes a step back, and it's like you're looking at it from another perspective. It's like it's the arrangement and the composition and the selection and the curation and the editing, all of those things. That is art. Like, art is all of that stuff. It's not strictly putting a brush on a canvas. But at the same time, I also did an experiment where, like, these paintings I think of as very, like, algorithmic. It's kind of like, I make like a line, and then I make another line that goes around it, and another one that goes around it, and I have kind of like rules sort of that I algorithmically follow in a loose creative process. So I took some photographs of the images that I made, and I put them into AI systems, and I tried to say, like, okay, make an image that's similar to this in the same style, and it couldn't. Like, it didn't understand any of my like algorithmic machinations that I had undergone when I did it. So that was an interesting thing to discover. Like, it had this really surface interpretation.
Wow, that's a cool experiment as an artist. Yeah, to go out of we got the little time limit thing. I forgot about that. I need to get my Zoom Premium now. Yeah, that's a cool little experiment as an artist to input some of your own work and kind of see how AI interprets it. Because another thing, and you kind of touched on this, is that idea of so much work being sort of consolidated by AI and being taught using to teach AI, and how well it does of actually portraying that again. Like, if you want, you can type in make a Rembrandt, and it can try and do its best at a Rembrandt. But if I think that you kind of get a different depth of understanding of it when you're inputting your own art to it, your process behind it, and is this like sort of a phony assimilation of the color schemes and line work and stuff like that, but it doesn't have the same soul that you put into it, because you are not a machine. You have thought behind it, and you have creativity behind it. Like, you could make a million Rembrandts on AI, they'll never be a Rembrandt.
But it's not even just soul. It's like when I used the brush to make the images, I had certain rules that I followed that are mechanistic in a way, and it didn't have enough deep insight into how I composed these things at a line by line level to understand that was even a thing. So it's like it's a level of insight that the machines are very far away from having, which for now is good, because it's funny, I'm an artist using AI tools, but I'm not at all like a very big fan of AI and the direction of big technology in general. I think that there's a lot of technology that it has like way too much control over our lives, and I think AI is going to be just kind of another link in that chain, if we're not careful about how we use it, and it seems like we're not being careful. So
yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think it's one of those things that, no matter what someone's personal opinion is on, AI, both, imagery or writing programs or things like that, it's Pandora's box. Like, it's already open. Like, it's not going anywhere. And that, is kind of an intense thing to contend with, is that, like, there really is no going back now. Like, this is the new normal. What are you going to do with it?
Really good, like, aphorism, I think, in cybernetics, that comes from this guy named Stafford Beer. And it is the purpose of a system is what it does, and you'll sometimes see that abbreviated by its initials, but it's something that has really guided my thinking on these technologies. It's like, okay, we can say that you've made a system and you don't want anybody to use it to make nude images, or you don't want anybody to use it to make fake political images, or you don't want anybody to use it to do this and this and this. And it's like, okay, you can say that, you can ask people to not do that, but in the end, you've built a tool that does exactly that. It's like, yeah. It's like giving people a hammer and a bunch of nails and a piece of wood, and being like, please don't put any of these nails in the wood, only put the nails on the side, don't bang the hammer on the nails. It's like, it's a joke. It's like, you made a system that does this, and now own it. You know, like you made a system that could break an election, or you made a system that can make non-consensual pornography. You know, it's like, don't pretend that that's not what this system does. You know, like,
Yeah, I mean, it sounds honestly a lot like kind of the first rise of the internet, where it's like, what do you think people are going to do with it? They're going to do some horrible stuff. Like, you can give the system out and people will interpret it in their own way, and people are very, very sneaky. They'll do really shitty things.
and also like they'll find ways to profit off of it too. You know, it's like, this is something I saw working in content moderation is like, okay, people tend to think like, well, so they might only make pennies on a video or on an article or on an image that's just like for clickbait, you know, but pennies add up. And especially like in other countries where the US dollar, getting paid a few bucks in US dollar currency can go a long way in some countries. So it's like, people, you know, human nature never changes. We have to accept that. And I think we shouldn't try to use technology to fix or change human nature. I think that's like a big temptation with AI too, is like, okay, well, we'll just use AI to find all the bad stuff, you know, and then we'll fix it. And it's like, well,
this is it, the silver bullet.
yeah, and it's like, you know, each one of these steps leads us in a dangerous direction, and we can't go back either. So, you know, what do we do? And that's why I just think of this thing about the purpose of the system is what it does is like, okay, instead of having these ideas or aspirations about what this should be, let's just have a clear-eyed perspective about what it is in its current state, what are its capabilities and limitations that we know of, how are people using it, and what are the outcomes of the use, you know. And it's
And I think that, one thing I really appreciated, honestly, going kind of down this rabbit hole and reading your book and looking at some of your other works, because I think that it honestly, kind of changed my perception on what, AI art is. Because one of my favorite books growing up is called Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. And it was like, a young adult novel. And the whole thing was illustrated with old, like, carnival photos, like photos where, they make it look like someone was levitating, or like, someone was like holding fire in their hand or something like that. And so it's these all like weird black and white photos, and it reminded me a lot of that. And it kind of, it sparked into my mind how now there's no longer a bottleneck where someone needs to be a good illustrator in order to have their story be told. Like, I'm not someone who has the skill or ability to, like, make a bunch of photos that look like they were from, Bird's fictitious trip to Antarctica where he found ruins. But, with this, I could tell my story. I could be a great writer. I could write out, all the parts that I want to say, and I could illustrate it with images that, I have a lot of control over, and I don't have to learn a whole new medium in order to achieve.
Yeah. I mean, and this is something I've seen as a criticism of my work too, is like, okay, by using AI to produce art, you're putting other artists out of work who you might have hired to do those images. But it's like, look, I'm an artist myself, so I would never have hired somebody to make, I would have never hired somebody to make 200 images for an ebook. Otherwise, I would have done it myself. And it would have taken me forever to do 200 images, and I would have not had the same style or the same quality or been able to do the same thing with it. So, like, to me, this tool is like a force multiplier for an artist. It's like, now I can go in and achieve my vision like quickly and get a functional first version. It might not be perfect, it might not be everything that I want, but I can get it out there.
The thing that I think people are the most fearful of when it comes to, like, putting artists out of business is, the first time that, like, Disney makes a movie that's all done with AI. Like, the script is AI, the animation is done with AI, and all the artists that are working for them now didn't get to do AI. But it's bizarre that that same fear sort of translates to someone like you, who is an independent artist. No matter what you were making at any point in history, your art would have been your art. Like, it doesn't really matter as much with the media. If anything, the AI is giving an artist a job because you just used it as an art medium and are using it. Like, that's not putting anyone else out of a job. Whereas if, you were working, you had like 20 artists working for you to illustrate a book, and you're like, you guys are all fired, I'm doing with AI, that would be different. But you clearly are not in that boat.
Yeah, and it lets me do things that I couldn't do before. It lets me, like, get all these explorations of sort of like a creative landscape, and then once I've kind of like marked out the landscape, I can say like, oh, I want to go in this direction with the work, instead of having to spend like days or weeks or months or whatever trying to determine something. I can collapse the time frame that brings me to the creative solution that I want. I see that we have a minute and a half left on this. What do you want to do?
Well, I would say I feel pretty sufficient for now. Maybe we can do a little follow-up later at some point if we feel the need. But I guess since we're sort of running close to the end of our time here, why don't I give you a couple seconds here to make some closing words?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I don't have too much more to say beyond that. Good luck for people who are encountering these issues. Like something I've thought about. Like people sometimes ask me, like, well, what can we do to kind of like stop or deal with these problems? And something I've done actually recently is like I have blocked images and videos on most of the web. So I'm on a text-only internet, and it's awesome because so much garbage is just gone from my life. So
That's a good piece of advice. I may have to do that. Well, Tim, thank you very much for joining us here today. I appreciate your expertise, and thank you for your time. All right, have a good one, man. Bye.